Where do the Jazz rank in terms of the best young cores in the NBA? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and I'm excited and honored to have the opportunity to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. I always love talking to you guys. Most of you guys know me by now, but if you don't and you're new to listen to this, welcome aboard. I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 and 2024 NBA Draft Combine, Utah Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician the past 3 seasons. So don't expect all of the geeky numbers as usual to be gone, but I'll bring you a unique perspective, one with copious amounts of basketball watched and a lot of knowledge about some of the young players on the Jazz and in the NBA because of the amount of college basketball I cover. Well, thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is, where do the Jazz rank, in your opinion, in terms of the youthful talent of the NBA? And that's an aggregation of which players amount to the most talent on a roster, not just who are the best talents. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime, so download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. So in today's episode, I'll talk about the Jazz signing Svi Mykhailiuk. He's the newest Jazz signing and what he brings to the table, and discuss the nuances of his deals, then outline what I like about the Utah Jazz's core. In the second segment, I'll talk about my top 3 youthful teams in the NBA. The third segment, I'll continue ranking the best youthful teams in the NBA and compare them all to the Jazz and maybe mention what I think the Jazz are missing in comparison to those who have the best cores in the NBA. So let's dive right in. Small forward Svi Mykhailiuk has agreed to terms on a 4-year, $15 million deal with the Utah Jazz, according to league sources. The deal was first reported by Woj. In 41 games last year for the championship-winning Boston Celtics, Mykhailiuk averaged 4 points per game, shot 39% from 3. His best season, however, came in 2019/2020 with Detroit, where he averaged 9 points a game over 56 games of action and shot 40.4% from 3. Really good shooter. The team, you guys are wondering, okay, why does this matter? Well, the team is set to make a number of signings official. After this team officially signs Mykhailiuk, Drew Eubanks, Johnny Juzang, and rookie Kyle Filipowski, the Jazz will have filled 14 of its 15 standard roster spots. That's important because traditionally the Jazz prefer to leave the final roster spot open as they go through training camp heading into the new season. Most notably, the Jazz probably were going to sign Joel Bolomboy. Well, it turned out it was going Royce O'Neal with that last vacant spot. So sometimes this really does matter. Jazz fans kind of had a sour ending to Royce O'Neal, but Royce O'Neal, for better or worse, was a great 15th man signing and turned out to be a starter for the Jazz for years. So the 4-year contract that veteran swingman Svi Mykhailiuk signed with the Jazz only includes $3.5 million in guaranteed money, and Hoops rumors learned that 3.5 is the salary Svi will earn in this upcoming season. The second and third years of his deal will be roughly $3.7 million, $3.85 million, respectively. So 2025/2026 would be 3.7. And then if he were to be there a third year, it'd be about 3.85. And those are non-guaranteed, as well as 4.025 for the 27-28 season. So the only guaranteed year, I should say, would be this upcoming season, or will be this upcoming season. Maybe you'll get more down the road, but we'll see how he does. Now, for a little background on Svi before I dive into ranking the youthful course, he was 17 on the Kansas Jayhawks, came straight from Ukraine, didn't speak too much English, came to Kansas, played on a Final Four team in Kansas, moving from Ukraine, played the stretch four for Kansas, and mostly a 3 and at times a 2 in the NBA. He can really shoot the ball, as demonstrated by the stats I read off earlier. So now that we've addressed the latest Jazz news, let's talk about the team and the exciting youth and why the Jazz fans should be excited before I rank a fair amount of teams that I would say have assets and youth that are ahead of the Utah Jazz. So what do the Jazz possess? The Jazz have a 27-year-old locked-in long-term who's very good. That's what Lauri Markkanen is. I wouldn't necessarily rank him in the youth, but what he does bring is stability. Now they have a point guard who's 20 years old, who I think figures score around 17 points a game next year. He was on the all-rookie team a season ago. In year 2 of his entire life playing the point guard position after being a shooting guard his entire life, geared to score, and he's able to distribute. So the fact that they're discussing, do they have a franchise point guard after one season of playing point guard, is something to be happy about, not skeptical of. Yes, you can be skeptical of it in the long run, but that's a good problem to have. You'll hear me say that term again later, a good problem to have, or a luxury to have that problem. Then the Jazz selected, I'm going in order of the way I perceive the assets to be most valuable. So I go Lowry, but he's not exactly the young core. Then I go Keontae. And then you have Cody Williams. Jazz selected him 10th. And the Jazz probably would have taken him at number 2. I think their board went as follows: Stephon Castle, Cody Williams. End of discussion right there. They also really liked Zach Edey. Edey went ahead, and it would have been a real debate, but I think they still would have taken Cody Williams if both were available at 10, should Edey or Williams not be taken 9, which was the case. He was very good in the summer league in an understated way, which I think is better than the flash plays made of selfishness that usually get the hype in social media talking about, hey, this guy made a big dunk. Cody Williams did that a few times. He made flash plays, but he did it playing connected basketball, did it the right way, attacked closeouts, created advantages for his teammates, scored efficiently. Both James Barlow and I ranked him number 5 in a redraft, and James had him 16 pre-draft, I had him 5. So we're expecting an all-rookie caliber player, someone that maybe takes a little bit longer to develop, but has the tools to be really good down the road. So that's the third asset that I think the Jazz have. Then the Jazz have a guard who came off the bench, having the best year of his career, scoring 21 a game when he started, upping his efficiency tremendously in Colin Sexton, who has a prove-it year for the Jazz. The Jazz ramp up the rebuild and have a desired timeline and kind of a targeted approach this year, as opposed to plodding along in mediocrity, figuring out what's the direction of the franchise, going 500 through 52 games and the worst team in the NBA through the final 30. The Jazz have a direction this year, and it'll be interesting to see, does Colin Sexton warrant keeping down the road in a position that he's a 2 guard, but is he big enough for what the NBA covets right now? Size and versatility. Does he score well enough to be a starter because he was so much better as a starter than he was off the bench? Yeah, it's a prove it year, but I think that's still a really good commodity to have on your roster. Then the Jazz have a center who was selected to the USA World Cup team after year 1 in the NBA, where he was a top 3 in Rookie of the Year voting, all rookie first team member, as a premier shot blocker in the NBA, who plays with tremendous energy, who figures to anchor the middle and play more this season, as I anticipate less appeasing of the ego of John Collins and less trying to ramp up the trade block, as the Jazz want to see what they truly have in Kessler in a make or break year. They have him and his 3rd season. He's a premier shot blocker in the NBA. Even in his sophomore slump season, was excellent protecting the rim. The Jazz then have a player who shot 39% from 3 and is an excellent athlete, maybe a little theoretical, who's raw in the shape of a long 3-and-D, who shot 39% in college and in the NBA, is learning to get better on defense, perhaps has ball skills that are untapped. I don't know. I've been critical of Hendricks before, but you read it out like that without fabricating anything. All that's true. And that's your 6th guy that you are excited about with assets to boot. That's pretty good. Then keep going. The Jazz still have more guys that are youthful and factor into the equation. The Jazz have 3 other players, 20 years or younger, all 3 of whom have scored a lot in college, one of whom was the number 1 player in the high school class, who has rare burst the rim and untapped passing skills and potential, ability to get to the rim on a team in a condensed floor in collegiate basketball, on a team that couldn't shoot. Isaiah Collier's biggest knock was turnovers. He still made passes that no one else in the draft made as a distributor of the ball, scored when he wanted to score, showed that at the summer league. Yes, he had turnover woes and not a great shooter, but he shows something that's a rare trait in the NBA, much less college. That's the 7th guy you're talking about here? That's pretty good. Then you got another who shoots incredibly well, has a strong frame. His freshman year at Ohio State was a 42% shooter from 3. The NBA proved he could shoot the ball. He's worked on his body a ton and looks significantly better from the eye test, having been in the locker room last year, seeing him day to day, working on his shot, working on his build, all the intensive effort to get in better shape. And then seeing him at the summer league, you saw it was night and day difference. Everyone there was raving about Bryce Sensabaugh's improved shape. Of course, he can shoot the ball. Yes, he proved he could rebound using that frame. So what does he bring next year? It's going to be interesting to see how much he plays and how much he can prove it. Then the Jazz have a guy in Filipowski who shined brightly as the 5 on offense in the summer league, demonstrating skills with the ball that were not necessarily demonstrated at the same level at Duke. That's impressive. He followed the footsteps of Kelly Olynyk, which is what many Jazz fans felt was missing from the Jazz's offense in the second half of the season. Something to be excited about. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the Jazz possess a lot of picks and assets to boot. Should they want all the picks, they can make these trades to acquire different picks or different players because they have the flexibility due to having these picks. And they go as follow. They have their own first-round pick next year, though I will say the Jazz need to land in the top 8 to protect their pick because they did not convey of this previous season drafting number 10. They have the Cleveland Cavaliers unprotected first-round pick for this season. The Minnesota Timberwolves unprotected first-round pick. Both of those factor to be in the 20s. And then in 2026, their own first-round pick and a pick swap with Minnesota. Own second-round pick, 27, own first-round pick. Own meaning the Jazz's, of course, for those of you guys listening. I am biased, but this is locked on Jazz right here. Then in 2027, the Jazz's own first-round pick, Cleveland's unprotected first-round pick, Minnesota's unprotected first-round pick, the Los Angeles Lakers first-round protected pick, but those protections are only 1 through 4, and LeBron James is unbelievable. He is a marvel, an absolute specimen, but I don't know how much he plays at the level that he's at right now towards that year. That's why that pick was so highly coveted, and the Jazz have it. 2028, the Jazz have their own first-round pick, a pick swap with Cleveland. Minnesota's first-round pick protected 1 through 4. Gobert may be out of the equation, but Anthony Edwards figures to keep the T-Wolves pretty on the right track. You'll hear about him later. And then the Jazz have their own second-round pick. That's a lot of picks, a lot of stuff to be optimistic about. There's a lot to be excited about, both as players and as what's to come in the draft should make you optimistic, because we've already talked about the 2025 draft being loaded. 26 might be even better. 27, 28, all these guys, the players coming from Europe, some of these premier talents like AJ Dibatsa, who's actually playing high school basketball in Utah, in Hurricane, Utah this year. There's going to be a lot of stars. The Boozers, yes, Carlos Boozer's twin sons will be in the next year's draft. Koa Pete, guys that are household names and have been to draft junkies like me since they've been 13 years old. You know how good these guys are? Well, I'm sure Danny Ainge in the front office do. So there's a lot to be excited about for the Jazz, but there's teams that are probably ahead of where the Jazz are. We're going to discuss them and say why they're ahead and how the Jazz can emulate these teams, because the Jazz have a lot of bites of the apple, and that should inspire faith, or at least less criticism, because yeah, the Jazz haven't picked a direction, but Ainge has hit on guys so far, and I have faith about Cody Williams. And Ainge has demonstrated he's a guy who's shown the ability to get the picks right high in the draft. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, these type of guys. And we've seen top picks equal winning. So if the Jazz commit to tanking, there's a lot of picks to come, and we got an already talented youthful core. So next we'll talk about what teams factor into the equation. We're talking about the best youthful cores in the NBA and compare them to Utah Jazz. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And let me tell you guys about Murdoch's Chevy. Murdoch's have been in Utah for over 80 years. Chevy's is as American as it gets. You think of a truck rolling down the road in a Western movie, that's going to be a Chevy, because of course it is. Chevy is the epitome of an American truck, but they've also got a great lineup, not only of the trucks, this Colorado and the Silverado, but of course the SUVs with the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Blazer, the Equinox, the Trax, all are there. And you can go to the website and check out the latest deals on these cars, both in terms of prices, But of course, you can see what's in the inventory. It's up to date, and it's up to date for all the different locations. Like I said, Woods Cross and Logan, and you can see what's in what store and communicate with people, the excellent people who work at Murdoch Chevy, to find you the best deal for you. Welcome back. And by the way, are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long and have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So welcome back. I'm Leif Thulin, and thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. For your second, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, as you guys know. And Locked On NBA keeps providing daily basketball analysis for national and local experts 30 minutes or less. And no one keeps you as informed, as the entertained, or anything you may enjoy about the NBA as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we talked about there was optimism about the Jazz's young core, but here is why there's trepidation. It's because the rest of the West is loaded with young stars, and we have to build to compete against those guys. So here are my top cores. Some of these are predictable. The number one is easily the Oklahoma City Thunder. Shea, Chet, Jalen Williams, Kaysen, the other Jalen Williams, Isaiah Joe, Nikola Topic, Aaron Wiggins, and more picks than even the Utah Jazz. They're already a number one seed, have already prioritized which pieces matter the most in dealing Josh Giddey, who factored, like if you looked at his stats early in his career, you'd be like, well, that guy's going to be a really good player. And he still may be, but he didn't figure into their equation down the road. So they traded him. They've already taken the steps to really be awesome because they have better players than even he at 21 years old, who's been a good player in his young NBA career. Furthermore, they have tons of picks. And despite not being really loaded with shooters, they led the NBA in three-point percentage due to taking great shots, attacking closeouts time and time again, and having enough good players to be selective and take the right shots each time. Then they have a guy who is number two in the MVP voting, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They have the growth potential of Chet, who effectively was a rookie last year, even though he was 2 years removed from college. Jalen Williams, to me, is pretty close to on par already with Lauri Markkanen, but I think he's got a brighter future than Lauri Markkanen, who we just paid $238 million. And you guys know, I just talked about how excited I was about having Lauri on the contract and having a plan that revolves around winning with Lauri Markkanen in the short term. I think Jalen Williams is that good, and he's their third most valued youthful player. That speaks to how highly I think the Thunder's plan and their young core. Next up, number two, the Orlando Magic. They have a number one pick who plays like a star in a premier position in Paolo Banchero, who is a star by year two, a co-star who's big, super skilled, and plays two ways in Franz Wagner. And then there's a significant dip between those two and the rest of their youthful players. But the reason I have them too is because I think so highly of those two players, Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. I think Paolo is more capable than Lauri to be a tier one star who is tasked with winning games when it comes to it. And Franz, and I think he's not quite there yet, so don't misinterpret that. But I think it's by the time the Magic are truly ready to contend. I know they were in a 7-game series last year as a 5 seed. Paolo is going to be a better player than I think Lauri will be at any point in his career. I think that highly of Paolo. Once again, not a knock on Lauri. I just think Paolo Banchero is awesome. They also have Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, Cole Anthony, Jet Howard, if you believe in him, in the backcourt. And I think Keontae could and probably will be better than all of those guys. But you have a bunch of players. You got to list them who are young and solid. Wendell Carter, still there, still pretty young. He's in the same draft as Lauri. Then you have Jonathan Isaac, who in my opinion is the best defender in the NBA when he's healthy. Now, you might be able to just tell me when Wanyama is the best, and I'll just believe you because I think he's that amazing. But Jonathan Isaac is pretty young, and when healthy, he is a monster defensively. And they already had a really strong defensive identity. And you factor him into this equation along with all those players I named, they got depth of young players, and they're only going to get better. And you add in the rookies they added this year, and I thought they drafted pretty well. I thought Tristan Da Silva fits what a team need. They could be a problem in the East sooner rather than later. The Magic are a perfect example of what I want for the Jazz eventually, and they have their dude in Paolo by winning the lottery and getting a premier talent. They selected shrewdly and found a hidden talent in plain sight, selecting Franz at 8, and have loaded up the rest of the team through the draft with complementary players who aren't stars but are good in their own regard. The Jazz can emulate this build fairly easily, as I've said on prior episodes on Locked On Jazz, saying the Jazz may want to study the Magic in the short term and in the long term in order to reach a promised land shorter in a more succinct fashion than the drawn out tanking job. And that's an episode I did probably 4 or 5 months ago, but I still agree with it. The third team that I'd rank in the top 3 is the Memphis Grizzlies. The pitch is simple. Ja, when healthy, is a problem. He's unbelievable. Jaren Jackson has been a defensive player of the year who can score and shoot the basketball stretching the floor. And Desmond Bane, who's the third of that trio, is paid $200+ million for a reason. Is he can shoot and be a supplementary creator, and he's further developed his game when Ja Morant was out, which is scary for the rest of the NBA when he can go back to being a third option, second option offensively, third most valuable player on their team, in my opinion. Then, I mean, what else do I have to say? They've been number 2 in the West before. They have experience in the playoffs and have added the likes of Santi Aldama since they were in the playoffs. He was on the team, but he wasn't factoring into the equation. Now he's a solid player. He's going to be firmly in rotation. Added Zach Edey, who fit a desperate need to get bigger. And while I was somewhat critical of the pick when it happened, he looked really good in Salt Lake Summer League. He sprained his ankle later, but he looked really good in all the games. Ran well, lost weight since the combine. I saw him in person both places, and he looked unbelievably in shape for someone that big. And yes, his behemoth factor did matter in those games, and he impressed at the combine even before he lost some of that weight. So coming up next, I'll round out my top young cores in the NBA and continue to compare the Jazz to these teams. Welcome back. Leif Thulin here. Continue to rank and compare the young cores of the NBA. At 4, I'd go with the San Antonio Spurs. The main reason is Wembanyama. He's an alien. To the point, I think he's already a top 20, maybe top 25 if you're being conservative player in the NBA. And at the age of 20, and he's rapidly improving. And I mean rapidly. He was so good as a rookie that the Spurs would lose games that they could and maybe should have won by sitting him as long as he was in. So essentially, he was on a minutes restriction to make sure they weren't too good in year 1. That's ludicrous. Absolutely insane. He does things I've never seen before. I watched him warm up, and it was fascinating. He is a freak among freaks. And then you watch him at the Olympics. Defensively, you'd think, oh, Wembanyama and Gobert, of course, are going to be defensively. Well, Gobert ended up riding the pine, sitting on the bench, because Wembanyama is so good that they didn't really need Rudy Gobert to patrol the paint and be great defensively. I mean, it was a little redundant. There are other reasons for this. And this is not to slight Rudy. I love Rudy Gobert and loved him as a Jazz man. Think he's awesome with the T-Wolves. Think he deserved the Defensive Player of the Year last year. But the guy who's going to win it this year, Victor Wembanyama. The Spurs at 4 is a little tricky, honestly, because they don't have a bona fide number 2 right now. It would be Devin Vassell, and as great a basketball player as Devin Vassell is, he's not someone that gets you excited as the second best young player on a team. But Wembanyama is that good. And once a great basketball mind named Gordy Chiesa told me, you'd love to have him as your 4th or 5th option. So right now he's overpaid, but in time it'll make sense. Gordy is a former Jazz assistant coach under Jerry Sloan, coached in college under Rick Pitino, also as a head coach at various schools, Manhattan, Providence, all these different places. Gordy's unbelievable. He'll forget more about basketball than I'll ever know than you'll ever know. But he takes the time and explains the game to anyone who will ask, and he's a wonderful human. So his point was essentially Devin Vassell's not a number 2, but you're going to pay him in advance because he would be a sensational 4 or 5. Well, the reason that matters is because they just drafted Stephon Castle, who I had number 1 in this class, and I thought he looked excellent in the summer league, showing he had far more game than he demonstrated at UConn. He's going to be under the tutelage of CP3 and Pop, along with Wembanyama. He's going to learn and play with a force of nature in Victor Wembanyama, who's also going to get better combining with Chris Paul and Popovich. And then you have Jeremy Sohan, Malachi Branham, Trey Jones, a lot of young players that are solid, but not spectacular. And then this is an important part and why I felt good enough to put him there aside from just having Wembanyama. They have a lot of picks and valuable, coveted picks and coveted drafts. They have a lot of assets. They even have the Atlanta Hawks, who we've talked about being one of those teams that we think is going to be truly terrible with the Utah Jazz and making it hard to get some of these Cooper Flags, Nolan Traore, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harpers. Well, they have two cracks at the bat. They have the San Antonio Spurs pick, of course, but they also have the Atlanta Hawks picks. And that's why I thought they were going to be a decent trade option if Lauri Markkanen was to be traded, because the Hawks picks are really valuable and the Spurs would have those picks. And they're not quite good enough yet to get over the unbelievably difficult Western Conference that's going to have some of these youthful teams for years to come. Plus Nikola Jokic, who's unbelievable, the best player in the NBA right now. All these teams in the West, the aging but still sensational Kevin Durant teaming up with Devin Booker, two Olympic team starters. LeBron James and Anthony Davis, who just won gold as well, are teams that I think are like play-in teams. Steph Curry, play-in team. Like, that's how good the Western Conference is, that those guys are pushed down in the hierarchy of the West. And so the Spurs aren't going to be there yet, which means they're going to get more good picks to complement Victor Wembanyama. That's why they're fourth. And then this next team, I'll say this. The Jazz probably have a better 2 through 7 than the San Antonio Spurs right now of young players. But that number one is so special. It demonstrates the necessity of chasing the ultimate prize in getting those top pick type guys. Yes, Wembanyama is a generational talent once every 20 years. It goes LeBron James, Victor Wembanyama as the two best prospects ever. And the Jazz may not get one like him. They probably won't. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to get a Cooper Flag or an AJ Dibatsa in the next 2 years. So the Jazz probably have a better 2 through 7, but I'm more bullish on the Spurs' future because they have that guy in Victor Wembanyama. So this next team has been chasing the ultimate prize, and they've reaped some rewards. It's the Houston Rockets. The Rockets have a lot of high draft picks that don't quite fit, but it is a luxury that you can afford to thin the troops and pick out the best of the bunch of your young talent. If you draft enough at the top, and last year they were 41-41 and stand to improve as their youth does, you can afford to choose which guys you want to stay and play more prominent roles. Their best player to me, Alperen Şengün. He was drafted 16th, but is a lesser version of Jokic or Sabonis, but of the same mold, which, as we're seeing, is truly thriving. They also have a second, especially if you have players that can complement them defensively and make up for the defensive inefficiency or deficiencies with their own offensive brilliance and efficiency. The Rockets have Ime Udoka, who makes you be very good defensively, and they have the talent to support defensively. They also have a second pick in Jalen Green, who had a month or two last season that showed the potential many saw, and he put up numbers that would at least warrant discussion to say, hey, maybe they weren't crazy in comparing him to Dwayne Wade due to the burst and athletic ability that he demonstrated at prolific prep and then in the G League and went number 2. I would say he's been disappointing as a 2 pick, but you can at least see, hey, maybe not, as he had 2 months last year where he was really, really good. Then they've had 3 more number 3 picks in the recent drafts. Jabari Smith Jr., who I criticized in the draft for not being an on-ball threat, as why he should not be taking number 1, despite rumors he would be, to Orlando. And I was right about that. Banchero was my number 1, and Jabari Smith is criticized because people remember that. But he's still quite good at things that matter. He's a good shooter for a big, and he's got defensive versatility, and he's fluid, and he moves well. And you just got to find the best way to utilize a talent like that, or you move on and find someone who believes in that talent, and you find something that fits your style. That's why it's a luxury to have this many picks, because even if you miss, and I'm not saying he's a guaranteed miss, you can find someone that believes in that talent and find a player that you believe fits into your system and or along with your players that you deem to be better than this guy as a youthful core, and you improve down the road. Like I said, 41-41 last year in a loaded Western Conference. So they're pretty good. Now let's get to their next 3 pick. They had Amen Thompson, who's an elite athlete, was pick number 3. Compared to when he's compared to elite athletes in the NBA, he's an elite athlete compared to them. He defends, distributes, plays hard. He plays hard. You got to find out the best role for him, as you want the ball in the hands of different players, and he can't shoot, so you don't want him off the ball. But when the ball's in his hands, it takes it out of the hands of Şengün, who's your best facilitator. It might be difficult, but man, don't give up on that sort of talent after 1 year. Then they just drafted Reed Sheppard, who looked to be the most advanced rookie in terms of skill set, showing impressive guard skills and, of course, excellent shooting after shooting 52% at Kentucky as a freshman. On volume, too. Not amazing volume, but on volume. Reed Sheppard impressed at the Summer League, despite I was critical of him in the draft process. Like, that's a lot of young talent. Then they also have Tari Eason, whose activity is off the charts and is the type of player you want on your team and you'd hate to play against. The Rockets have tons of youth and may need to see who rises to the top. But that's a great problem to have. If the cream rising is legit and not just better than other young players in the team, which I fear at the present could be the case for the Jazz, that some players are better than others, but none of them are legitimate, true top-end talents, then that's a slight problem. But it's good to have the ability to decipher the talent for yourself, to determine if your talent's really, really good. The Rockets may have that in Alperen Şengün, Jalen Green, maybe Reed Sheppard. I don't think you're getting a top-tier player in Jabari Smith or Amen Thompson thus far, but they certainly aren't terrible. And it's really good to have the multiple cracks at the bat, bites at the apple to get your picks right. I mean, that's something. The last team I'll mention is simple, and I didn't put in my top 5 because I don't think they have that many young pieces, but it's the Minnesota Timberwolves. They're in the Jazz division. It's Anthony Edwards. He's really, really good. And Jaden McDaniels is very solid. Naz Reid just won 6th Man of the Year, really good. And now Rob Dillingham, who those of you who listen to Locked on Jazz know how I felt about Rob Dillingham in the draft. Ant is a top 10 player in the NBA, and the Jazz aren't close to having that. And the Wolves' 4th best player is what the Jazz want a few of their players to watch and emulate, making them defensively imposing. The Jazz have already sent Taylor Hendricks to watch Jaden McDaniels' film nonstop. One of the most popular comparisons, though I personally didn't see it, for Cody Williams because of his length, was Jaden McDaniels. So if your 4th best player is a guy that you're trying to convince other teams' top 10 picks to buy into, that's a good problem to have. Or it's just a luxury in general, not even a problem if you're the Timberwolves. Then you have a guy in Dillingham who's going to be under the tutelage of Mike Conley, next to the excellent defenders, and he doesn't have to worry too much about defending, which is his deficiency. He's just in there to score, learn how to distribute, and be a steadier player with all that potential to score. I think that's really good. Naz Reid just won 6th Man of the Year, like I said. So they factor in. The Jazz need a tier A star to truly compete, to truly compete. And Ant is on a mission to do so and came up short in the Western Conference Finals. So the Jazz need to load their team up to contend with the likes of Shea, Ant, and not to mention Jokic, who's still in the division, and in my opinion, is the best player in basketball, and proved it with Serbia this year. Like, he didn't even play a great game, and had he played a great game against the Americans, I think Serbia runs away with that game because they shot so well, because of the attention that Jokic commanded. He didn't play a great game, and if he did, I think they win that game. And that USA team was really good and played well together when it mattered. So the final verdict is the Jazz aren't close to the top, despite having lots of promising youth and many picks. The Jazz must truly embrace the tank and trust Danny Ainge to get them to the promised land. I think the Jazz have a lot of positive things to come from this episode. Like, I listed out these players and I tried to do an order, and I was selling myself, even though I knew where I was going to go with this. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. That's really good. Oh, they've got all these picks coming up. Both can be true. The Jazz aren't close, but they are in a pretty good spot. You just need to hit on a few of these picks, and you can flip your position in this board. And it'll be fun to revisit after watching these rookies play, after watching how the Jazz select the next years. It's a process to get to the top, but the Jazz need to go about it the right way. And that's been borne out by talking about these talents. You talked about all of these. What's the common thread? They've hit on draft picks at the top of the draft. That's as simple as it is. So thank you again for making Locked on Jazz your first listen today. Now go check out Locked on NBA podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. And you can find the link to Locked on NBA in the description, so you don't need to search. It's all part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you guys for listening. We always appreciate it. And I love hosting this. I'll be back with you later this week and a few more in the month of August. So thank you for listening. And as always, you guys know what I'm going to say. Go Jazz.